I sold over 1,500 pieces of secondhand clothing in 2024, which is kind of mind-boggling when I say it out loud. In today's video, I'm going to share my top 10 most expensive items that sold this year, as well as a few personal favorites. Before we get into that, this is my first full-length video on YouTube, and I figured an introduction was in order. Perhaps you see my shorts or follow me on Instagram, but if you don't know me, my name is Ken, and I am the owner, founder, CEO, I guess, of StyleBidder, which is a curated secondhand clothing business specializing in vintage menswear and designer menswear. I've been selling part-time on eBay since 2012, and I've actually been selling on Grailed since its inception in 2014. Over the years, the business has kind of just spiraled into my full-time job. I still sell on eBay and Grailed, but along with my friend Dan, we sell at pop-up markets across the Northeast United States, offer consignment, and we'll be opening our own web store in 2025. I am working on a video with our full backstory, so make sure you hit subscribe so you can be here when that drops. So with all that combined with our eBay store, Grailed page, and the odd Instagram sale, that has worked out to 1,596 items that have sold as of December 30th. So there's actually a pretty good chance we could break 1,600 this year. If you're curious if that's a lot for us, which it certainly sounds like it is, last year we sold a total of 1,459 items. We sold at 16 in-person pop-ups. And in 2022, we sold 1,185 items with a total of 6 in-person pop-ups. So we're seeing steady growth, but it's nothing outside the usual. Before we get into our most expensive sales of the year, I'm going to start things off with my favorites. And there's 2 reasons why I wanted to include them here instead of just making a video of my most expensive sales. First, you'll see once we get into them, but our most expensive items, they're really not the most interesting items that we sold. And second, I wanted to show that you don't need to spend a lot of money to be stylish, which is a core principle behind my whole business. Now, picking favorites turned out to be a pretty hard task for me. I really only try to sell things that I like. There's always going to be an exception, but it could be argued that nearly every piece we sell is a favorite of mine. Now, since it would be impossible to show every piece I thought was cool, I decided to focus on items that the circumstance in which we sold them is what made them special to me. So a big thing that happened for my business this past year was getting to collaborate with Brooks Brothers on 2 of their vintage shops. Towards the end of last year, I sold a vintage Brooks Brothers tie to Michael Bastian, who is the creative director for Brooks Brothers. I actually recognized his name and I decided to write him a note and I said, hey, I have more vintage Brooks Brothers pieces if you need them. Sure enough, he ended up reaching out to me to let me know that they were looking for someone to source vintage for their vintage shops. And we ended up doing 2 of them, and this is essentially where they sell special Brooks Brothers vintage pieces through their website. And this was honestly the coolest opportunity I've had doing what I do, and of course pieces from these collections are going to be in my favorites from this past year. This was probably the most unique piece from our spring collection, and this is a 1980s Brooks Brothers cabana jacket, which is essentially a terry cloth blazer made especially for resort wear. What makes this one even cooler is the stripe pattern that is referencing a rowing blazer, which is a classic school sports uniform that kind of became its own preppy fashion trend in the 1960s. What was really cool about working with Brooks Brothers on this vintage shop is they actually reached out to influencers to style the pieces as promotion for the shop. This piece was picked by Malcolm Alexis, and I thought he did a really good job styling this one with a few of the contemporary Brooks Brothers pieces. One of my goals working on this vintage shop was to find Brooks Brothers pieces that break the traditional aesthetic that you think of when you think of Brooks Brothers. So obviously the cabana jacket is a great example of that, and this patchwork Shetland sweater from the fall collection, I also thought it did a really good job of that. This is from the 90s. It's a faux patchwork intarsia knit. And I actually found a few of these for this collection, but this one was my favorite of all of them, as I really like the bright colors. I like the contrast between the cable knit and the regular knit. Now, the other really big thing that happened for my business this year was getting to sell at Newport Folk Festival. And I really cannot thank Tracy and Hillary from Wild Hudson enough for this opportunity. Despite growing up in Rhode Island and hearing many stories from my dad who attended the early days of the festival, I've never actually been able to attend. So it was already very exciting to go, let alone to have my business included in such a legendary event. It was really a perfect weekend with amazing weather, amazing music, and it was actually our highest grossing pop-up that we did this year. We sold a lot of great pieces to a lot of great people, but there's one transaction that sticks out to me. On Friday, we ended up meeting several members of the band, the Black Pumas, who were performing that evening. And Eric, who is the lead singer and frontman, actually ended up buying this 1950s, 1960s La Playa camp collar shirt from us. And he ended up wearing that shirt on stage for his performance. I got to go watch them perform, and it was really mind-boggling to see one of my pieces on stage. They actually ended up bringing out Mavis Staples from the Staples Singers for one of their songs, and it's wild to think that a shirt that I sold was a part of, mind you, a very small part of, the legendary history of this music festival. One last favorite I have to include is one that's sold at Alfargo's Marketplace, which is just one of my favorite events to do. It is a menswear specific market that happens in Manhattan. I am really into Shetland sweaters at the moment, and I sold this beautiful cable knit one from Murray's Toggery shop to our friend Addleton, who ended up posting some pictures of it on his Instagram with some outfits. I thought he did a really good job styling it. It's just a great piece that sold to a really nice guy from a really fun weekend, and it's the perfect trifecta of why I love to do what I do. Now that I've covered my favorites, let's move on to our most expensive items that sold this year. I'm going to count them up from 10. I decided to include multiple items that sold at the same price point as separate entries, rather than having them all have multiple ties for individual places. And this list would be like 25 items if I decide to do it that way. So for number 10, we have this 1960s Brooks Brothers suit that was included in our fall vintage shop with them. Dan actually found this one several years back before we even knew about our collaboration, and it had just been sitting in our backlog waiting for this moment, I guess. This sold for $375. Number 9 is a tracksuit from the brand Needles. I'm a big fan of this brand, although I've never actually sold a tracksuit from them before. It's kind of one of the pieces they're known for. This sold for $375, and it came to us through a consignor. Number 8 is one of 2 pairs of Vibergs on this list that are both from our consignor, boot expert, overall cool guy, Tico Blanco. These are a Prairie Boot collaboration with Withered Fig, and they sold for $385. Number 7 is probably my favorite of the top 10. This is an Engineer Garments duffel coat from Fall/Winter 2017. This features a custom woven plaid fabric by Woolrich that was made specifically for Engineer Garments for this season. I was sent this one on consignment. I really liked it. I tried it on. I thought about keeping it. I ended up doing a reel with it for our Instagram. This sold back in February for $400. For 5 and 6, we have this duo of striped suits from our Spring Brooks Brothers collection. One is Seersucker, one is Whipcord. They're both from the 70s, and they both sold for $400. Next, we have another pair of boots from our friend Tico. I am totally going to butcher this pronunciation, but I believe it's Underhood, and these are engineer boots that are in a Horween Chrome Excel leather. From what I understand, these are really hard to come by, super low production. You have to DM the guy who made them, so it makes sense they sold for a lot. These sold for $400. Third in our most expensive items that sold in 2024 is that second pair of Vibergs I mentioned. These are a collaboration with Milo Shop. They are in a chamois rough out leather. These sold for $425. Now our top 2 most expensive items are a good example of not being that exciting despite going for a lot of money. Number 2 is this Dolce & Gabbana Martini line suit. This one was new with tags, which is why I went for so much. Personally, I think Dolce & Gabbana has made a lot more interesting tailoring than this piece specifically. Pretty simple, solid black, self-stripe, single vent. This was sent to me on consignment. It sold for $450. Now, number 1 is arguably more interesting, mainly because of how much it sold for. But if you're someone who's really into bespoke tailoring, this isn't going to be a surprise to you. All right, drum roll please. Our most expensive item that sold in 2024 is this Sifonelli bespoke suit that sold for $750. Now, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of this one as well. My apologies. I actually think this is the second most expensive item I've sold in my whole career. This is my first time selling the brand, although I've been familiar with them for a while. They are a very high-end Parisian tailor that does a lot of custom bespoke work. I got this suit on consignment, but it's worth noting that my consignor was not the original owner. This was actually a really lucky thrift store find for him. Considering this was bespoke, the original owner paid over 5,000 euros to have this made for him. Now, $750 for a secondhand suit is a lot of money, but if you're comparing it to the retail price, I guess it's a bargain. I remember being very impressed with the handiwork and the fabric on this one. It was a super high thread count worsted wool, so it was super smooth and soft to the touch. The jacket was single button closure, which is unique, but kind of a signature detail that Cifanelli is known for. I sold this in January, and I believe I only had this listed for a few days, which I love when that happens, let alone when it's my most expensive sale for the year. Thank you for watching this quick recap of what was a really good year for my business. If you like the video, I'd really appreciate if you just pressed all of the buttons. I am just getting started here on YouTube, and I can use all the help I can get. I hope you have a happy new year, and I'll talk to you in 2025.